I can't pinpoint the exact moment I started suspecting something wasn't right, but looking back, there were small clues I ignored. Little things that, at the time, seemed insignificant. It's strange how the truth can hide in plain sight, slipping under your radar until you're forced to face it. Sarah and I had been together for 5 years, married for almost 3. On the surface, we were a solid couple. No big fights, no secrets we couldn't talk about. Life felt routine, predictable, in a good way. There was comfort in it. Every morning, we had our little rituals. She'd leave for work, usually taking a taxi. Nothing out of the ordinary. That's how she liked it, convenient and quick. But lately, I couldn't shake the feeling that the driver wasn't just another part of her day. He was always there, without fail. The same cab, the same guy? For weeks, I barely thought about it. I guess when you live in a routine, you stop paying attention to the small stuff. But one morning, everything changed. I'd taken an early day off from work, and as I watched from the window, I noticed how they interacted. It was subtle, just a moment. Sarah stepped out of the cab, and for a brief second, they exchanged a few words. It wasn't what they said, but how they said it. There was something in their exchange that felt different. Too familiar. Too intimate. The way he looked at her wasn't the way you look at someone you're just giving a ride to. She smiled as she walked away, but it wasn't the usual, I'm off to work grin. It was a private smile, the kind you share with someone when there's an unspoken understanding between you. I tried to brush it off. Maybe I was just reading into things. Maybe I was just tired. But that feeling lingered, creeping into my thoughts like a shadow I couldn't outrun. The next few mornings, I found myself watching them more closely. Every time the taxi pulled up, I'd pay attention to how they exchanged their hellos and goodbyes. The tension in the air was palpable, even if it wasn't obvious to anyone else. And every time Sarah came home, there was a certain lightness about her, a glow that seemed to come from somewhere I couldn't reach. I started to tell myself I was being paranoid, that I was overthinking things. It was easy to do, right? I mean, who would jump straight to betrayal at the first sign of something slightly off? But every day felt like I was standing on the edge of something, watching Sarah slip further away without knowing why. Her smile, her laugh, even the way she'd talk about her day at work, it all seemed to have changed, just a little, just enough that I noticed. It wasn't just her mood or the way she acted around me. It was the way she acted around him, the taxi driver. I started paying attention to the small details. Little things like how she'd brush off his concern when he asked how her day went. Busy, she'd say, her tone just a little too dismissive, like she didn't want to reveal too much. But there was more. I started noticing how she'd get ready for work, how she would spend longer in the bathroom in the mornings, almost like she was making an extra effort to look a certain way. She would adjust her clothes when the taxi pulled up outside, like she was preparing for something, even though she had always been casual about it before. These little changes weren't huge, but they were enough to make me question everything. One evening, I decided to follow her. I don't know what I was hoping to find. Maybe just an answer, some kind of closure to the growing suspicion gnawing at me. I waited until she left the house that morning, kissed her goodbye like usual, and then I did something I had never done before. I followed her. I kept my distance, far enough behind so that she wouldn't notice. She got into the taxi without a second glance at me. Her usual routine. Nothing out of the ordinary. But this time, I couldn't stop myself from watching. I kept my eyes locked on the car, my heart pounding in my chest, even though I had no reason to be nervous. What was I really afraid of? The taxi headed toward her office, just like it always did. But there was a part of me that wanted to know what happened next. After all, this was just a taxi ride, right? But as the car approached her office building, I noticed something strange. The driver didn't pull into the parking lot. Instead, he slowed down, and for a split second, I thought they were going somewhere else. My heart skipped a beat. I drove past, trying to act casual, as if I wasn't caught up in a story I couldn't quite finish. The uncertainty grew, hanging over me like a storm cloud that wouldn't quite burst. I couldn't explain what was happening. Why was I so consumed by the idea that something was wrong? I tried to convince myself that I was just being paranoid, that the taxi driver was nothing more than an ordinary part of Sarah's daily routine. But the more I watched, the more I began to see things I couldn't ignore. That day, after I followed her, I couldn't get the image out of my head. The way the taxi slowed down near her office but didn't go in. I thought about it all day. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe he was just waiting for traffic to clear. Maybe she just needed a minute, a break before diving into the grind of her day. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the case. Something was off. The next few days felt like I was walking on eggshells. I began to find myself paying attention to every little detail. The way she got dressed, the tone of her voice when she spoke about work, her excuses for being too tired after work. I was starting to feel like I was slipping into a shadow of a life I barely recognized. I had to know more. I had to see it with my own eyes. I couldn't keep playing this guessing game. So, I decided to follow her again. But this time, I was more cautious. I didn't want to risk getting caught. I kept a safe distance, watching as the taxi pulled up to our house that morning. She didn't seem different. Her usual smile, her usual wave. But I knew better now. The cab started its route, and I followed it from a few blocks behind. My pulse quickened as the car drove through the city, taking the usual turns. I had to stop myself from imagining the worst. But something about this ride felt different. I couldn't put my finger on it, but it was like there was a shift in the air, like the calm before the storm. Just when I thought things were playing out like any other day, the taxi made a sharp turn, veering off the usual route. I could feel my heart racing. Was I finally going to see something? The car slowed, and I watched as it turned into a side street I didn't recognize. My stomach dropped. I wanted to call her, ask her what was going on, but I held back. What would I even say? She didn't even look out the window, her face focused ahead. The cab turned down that strange street, and my heart was pounding in my chest. It was as if the world had shifted around me, and every breath felt like a guilty secret I was trying to keep. I couldn't think straight. I kept my car far enough behind so she wouldn't notice, but I couldn't help the fear that bubbled up inside me. Where was she going? Why was the taxi taking this route? The street was quiet, too quiet. It didn't feel like the kind of place you drive to for a quick errand or a work drop-off. The buildings were older, run down, tucked away from the busy parts of the city. My mind raced with all sorts of scenarios. Was she meeting someone? Was this just some weird detour? But then, as the taxi came to a stop in front of a building, I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. It wasn't just the unfamiliar street. The building, it didn't look like an office or anything related to work. The driver didn't get out, but Sarah did. She stepped out of the car, glanced around briefly, and then walked toward the entrance. I couldn't see who was inside or what exactly she was doing, but I didn't need to. In that moment, I realized something I hadn't wanted to admit. I was no longer in control of this story. I wasn't part of it anymore. I parked further down the street and waited. I wanted to believe it was nothing, just a wrong turn, a coincidence. But the silence in the car was deafening, and the waiting felt unbearable. My mind kept replaying the same question over and over. Who was she meeting? And why did it feel like I was the last to know? I told myself I'd give it a few minutes. I tried to calm down, to convince myself that this wasn't as bad as it seemed. Maybe she was just running an errand, maybe meeting a coworker for something work-related. But the longer I sat there, the more convinced I became that I wasn't going to like what I was about to discover. I watched the building's entrance, looking for any sign of movement, but nothing happened for what felt like an eternity. Finally, I saw the door open again, and Sarah stepped out. This time, she wasn't alone. There was someone with her, a man. My heart stopped. They spoke briefly, their heads close together, but I couldn't hear what they were saying. I watched as Sarah laughed, a sound I hadn't heard in weeks. It wasn't the usual polite laugh she'd give me after a joke. No, it was different. There was something more there. I couldn't see the man's face clearly, but the way they stood together, so comfortably, told me everything I needed to know. As they walked toward the taxi, something inside me cracked. I didn't know what to think anymore. The life I thought I knew, the woman I thought I married, was slipping away before my eyes, and I was powerless to stop it. They got into the taxi together. My breath caught in my throat, and for a moment, everything around me felt like a blur. I watched as they both settled into the back seat. The man, still a stranger to me, leaned closer to her, and they exchanged a few words, their voices low. I couldn't make out anything they said, but the way they looked at each other made my stomach turn. It was more than just casual conversation. It was too easy, too comfortable. The taxi pulled away from the curb, and I followed them at a distance, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. My mind raced with 1,000 questions, none of which I had answers to. Who was he? What were they doing together? Why was Sarah hiding this from me? The doubts I'd buried deep inside me now flooded to the surface, demanding answers. I tried to calm myself, reminding myself that I was being irrational. Maybe they were just friends. Maybe I was overthinking it. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the case. There was a connection between them that I couldn't ignore. The way Sarah had smiled earlier, the way they had spoken in that quiet, intimate tone, it was something I'd seen before. It was the kind of look I'd seen between lovers, not just casual acquaintances. The taxi took the same route home, but something inside me told me this wasn't over. I had seen enough to know that there was something going on between them, something that went beyond the bounds of a simple taxi ride. And yet, I couldn't bring myself to confront her about it. I didn't know how. How could I ask her if she was cheating on me without sounding like I was imagining things? How could I accuse her of something I wasn't sure of, when all I had were these silent, unsettling glimpses? They arrived back at our neighborhood, and the taxi stopped outside the house. Sarah got out first, and then the man followed her. They didn't say goodbye or exchange pleasantries, but the way they looked at each other made it clear that there was an understanding between them. I wanted to be angry. I wanted to confront her right then and there, but I didn't. I stayed in my car, watching as Sarah entered the house, her steps light and carefree. I stayed there for a long time after that, not knowing what to do or where to go from here. The truth, whatever it was, had slipped through my fingers like sand, and I was left standing in the dark, trying to make sense of a life that was no longer mine to understand. I didn't know what I was hoping for after that day. Maybe I expected some kind of clarity to settle in, like a fog lifting to reveal the truth. Instead, I was left with more questions, more confusion. The more I thought about it, the more uncertain everything became. I felt like I was stuck in a loop, chasing answers that were always just out of reach. By the time I got back to the house, it was almost dark. The door opened, and Sarah was in the kitchen, the scent of her dinner filling the air. The sight of her seemed so ordinary, so normal, and yet everything inside me was screaming that this wasn't right. She looked up, greeted me with that familiar smile, but there was something hollow behind it. I couldn't place it, but it made the room feel colder somehow. "Hey," she said with that same cheerfulness, as if nothing had changed. "How was your day?" I didn't answer right away. The words were stuck in my throat, because the question that was burning in me had nothing to do with my day. How could I even ask her about the man in the taxi? How could I tell her that I knew she'd been lying? I wanted to scream it, but I stayed silent. The silence between us felt thick, like it was waiting for something to break it. I wasn't sure what to say next, but I had to know. I couldn't keep pretending that I didn't notice what was happening. "Where did you go today?" I asked, keeping my voice low, trying not to show how much it hurt to even ask. She paused, her eyes flicking away for a moment. There was a brief hesitation in her movement before she put down her fork and looked back at me. "What do you mean?" I could feel the weight of her words in the air. She was avoiding me, and she was doing it badly. "I saw you this morning," I said. "The taxi didn't go to your work. It took a different route. Where did you go?" Her face tightened for just a split second, then smoothed back into the mask she'd been wearing all day. "I don't know what you're talking about," she replied, her voice a little too calm, too controlled. I knew she was lying. It wasn't the words, it was her eyes, the way she wouldn't meet mine. There was a part of me that wanted to believe her, that wanted to let it go and pretend I hadn't seen what I saw. But that part was fading, slipping away with every lie she fed me. The silence hung between us, heavy and suffocating. I stood there, trying to process what was happening, but I felt like I was losing grip on something I could never get back. She was lying, and I could feel it in every part of my body. But something about the way she said it made me hesitate. I wanted to push further, to demand the truth, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. It wasn't just about her lie. It was about what I was afraid I might discover if I dug deeper. If I kept asking, if I kept pushing her for answers, I might uncover something I wasn't ready to face. The silence stretched on, uncomfortable and thick. My mind was racing. I could hear the words on the tip of my tongue, but they were trapped, stuck between the desire to know and the fear of losing everything. I looked at her, trying to read her face, but it was like staring into a mirror. She'd perfected the art of hiding her emotions, and in that moment, I realized just how little I truly knew her. I tried to make my voice steady. "I'm not stupid, Sarah. I know something's going on." She froze for a second, and for the briefest moment, I saw something flash in her eyes, a mixture of guilt and annoyance, like I had crossed some invisible line. But it disappeared just as quickly, replaced by a carefully rehearsed calm. I don't know what you're talking about, she said again, this time with a little more edge to her voice. It was a defensive tone, the kind you use when you're trying to cover something up. But I wasn't buying it anymore. I felt a surge of frustration rise in my chest. I couldn't keep playing this game with her. You think I'm blind? I said, my voice rising. You think I don't see the way you act when he's around? The way you smile at him? The way you look at him when you think I'm not watching? I saw it, Sarah. And I can't just pretend I didn't. Her face flushed, but she didn't say anything. She just stood there, her eyes avoiding mine, her hands suddenly fidgeting with the edge of her sleeve. The air in the room felt suffocating, and I could barely breathe, knowing that the conversation was headed toward a place I wasn't ready for. I don't know what you're talking about, she repeated, but this time, her voice wavered just enough for me to hear the cracks in her calm facade. It wasn't the confident response I expected. It wasn't the cool indifference she had been trying to project. It was almost scared. My heart beat faster. This wasn't the reaction of someone who was innocent. I saw you with him today, I pressed. You were with him, Sarah. Why didn't you tell me? There was a long pause, and for a moment, I thought she was going to break. But then she turned away, walking to the sink and busied herself with washing her hands. It was as if she was trying to put distance between us, as if she could wash away the conversation with the water. I don't have to explain myself to you, she said quietly, the words barely audible, almost as if she didn't want to say them at all. But they hit me like a slap. Her words landed like a punch, and for a moment, I just stood there, frozen. It wasn't the response I expected. I thought she might try to defend herself, to apologize, to lie her way out of it. But she didn't. She simply turned away, washing her hands like the whole conversation had never happened. I could feel the blood pounding in my ears. This wasn't just a misunderstanding anymore. This wasn't me reading too much into things. She was hiding something. She wasn't even trying to deny it properly. And that stung more than I was ready for. Don't turn your back on me, I said, my voice tight, dangerous. It wasn't like me to be confrontational like this, but I was on the edge now. I could feel the years of trust one thought we'd built crumbling beneath me. She didn't respond, but I could see her shoulders stiffen. She kept her back to me, her hands still working at the sink. It felt like a small act of defiance, like she was putting up a wall between us. Sarah, I said again, trying to keep my voice steady. Where were you today? What did you do? I saw you with him. Why didn't you tell me about him? Why are you lying? Finally, she turned around, but there was no apology in her eyes, no remorse. Instead, there was something colder, something guarded. You don't have the right to question me like this, she said, her voice low but firm. That's when it hit me. She wasn't afraid. She wasn't even sorry. She was defensive, like I was the one in the wrong for asking questions, for trying to understand. This wasn't a simple miscommunication or a small secret. She was hiding something big, something I wasn't prepared to face. I'm your husband, I said, my voice shaking with frustration. I deserve to know the truth. I've been patient with you, Sarah. I've let things go, but now I can't ignore it anymore. You're not the person I thought you were. She looked at me, her gaze hardening, and for a moment, I thought she might break down. I thought she might confess. But instead, she did the opposite. She looked away from me, and in that moment, I saw something in her eyes, a coldness I didn't recognize. You don't understand, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. It's not what you think. I wanted to scream. I wanted to demand that she tell me everything. But instead, I just stood there, helpless, unable to get past the wall she was putting up. I had no idea what was going on, but I knew one thing for sure. Whatever it was tearing us apart. Her words felt like a weight pressing down on me. They hung in the air, thick and suffocating. I couldn't breathe. I stood there, frozen, my mind racing, but none of the thoughts I had made any sense. The woman standing in front of me was no longer the person I thought I knew. The trust one had in her was slipping through my fingers, and all I could do was watch as it vanished. Sarah, I said, my voice shaky. Just tell me what's going on. I need to understand. I can't keep guessing. This is tearing me apart. She didn't answer at first. Her gaze was distant, unfocused, and for a moment, it seemed like she was trying to hold herself together. But the silence between us only deepened, each second dragging on, making the distance between us feel unbridgeable. Finally, she spoke, but her words were barely more than a whisper. I didn't want you to find out like this, she said. Her eyes were on the counter now, avoiding mine, as if looking at anything but me could make it easier. But it didn't. Nothing would make this easier. What do you mean, find out like this? I asked, my frustration bubbling up. I don't need some apology. I just need the truth. I saw you with him. Why didn't you tell me? She closed her eyes for a moment, like she was gathering her thoughts, but I could see the walls going up, the distance growing wider. She wasn't going to make this easy on me. It wasn't supposed to happen like this, she said quietly, her voice almost pleading. It just did. I wanted to scream. I wanted to demand more. It didn't just happen, Sarah. You made choices. You could have told me. Why didn't you just be honest with me? She didn't meet my eyes. Instead, she stared at the floor, her hands gripping the edge of the sink. I never meant for it to go this far, she said, her voice breaking slightly. I didn't want to hurt you. It wasn't supposed to be like this. I couldn't process her words. They didn't make sense. If it wasn't supposed to happen, why hadn't she stopped it? Why hadn't she told me before? Why hadn't she given me a chance to fix whatever was broken? So, this has been going on for a while then? I asked, the words slipping out before I could stop them. My heart was hammering in my chest, but I couldn't stop myself from needing to know. What do you mean by that? She didn't respond at first. Her hands were trembling as she turned off the sink, avoiding my gaze. The silence between us was unbearable. Finally, she said, I don't know how to explain it to you. Not now, not like this. Her voice was faint, as though she was saying something she knew would be too much for either of us to handle. I stepped back, the weight of her words sinking in. This wasn't just a mistake. It wasn't a slip-up. Whatever had been going on, it had gone too far, and I was left standing here, clueless, desperate for answers I wasn't sure I'd ever get. Her silence became unbearable. The space between us felt like it was filled with 1,000 unsaid things, and I didn't know how to make them go away. Every time I looked at her, I saw a stranger. The woman I thought I knew, my wife, was slipping further and further from me, and there was nothing I could do to pull her back. I tried to steady my breathing, but the panic was crawling up my throat. Sarah, I can't keep doing this. I can't keep pretending that everything's fine when it's falling apart in front of me. I need to know who he is. What's going on? She didn't respond, her eyes locked on the floor, her hands still gripping the edge of the counter. The tension between us was so thick it was suffocating. I wanted to reach out to her, to make her look at me, but every time I moved closer, she seemed to pull away. I don't know how to make this right, she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. Her words were hollow, lacking conviction. I never wanted to hurt you, but I don't know how to fix this either. The helplessness in her voice only made everything worse. It wasn't a confession. It wasn't an explanation. It was just an admission of defeat, and that stung more than I was ready for. So you're just going to leave me here, hanging in the dark? You can't just tell me the truth, Sarah? She shook her head, and for the first time, I saw something flicker in her eyes, regret, maybe, or guilt, but it wasn't enough. It didn't change anything. It's not that simple. I don't know how to explain everything. I took a step back, shaking my head. You've been hiding something from me for months, maybe longer, and now you don't know how to explain it? This isn't just some misunderstanding. I'm not an idiot, Sarah. She flinched, but didn't speak. The pain in her silence was worse than anything she could have said. I could feel the anger bubbling up inside me, mixing with the hurt. Who is he? I demanded again. Why won't you just tell me? She opened her mouth as if to speak, but no words came out. Her breath caught in her throat, and for a moment, I thought she might finally break down and tell me everything. But instead, she just closed her eyes, her face tight with something she didn't want to show me. Please, Sarah, I said, my voice breaking. I need to know the truth. I can't live like this anymore, not with this hanging over me. She looked at me then, her face pale, her expression unreadable. And in that moment, I realized she wasn't just afraid of losing me. She was afraid of what telling me the truth might mean for her. The silence between us felt suffocating. Sarah stood with her back to me, rigid, like she couldn't face me. I was drowning in the weight of everything unsaid, and I couldn't stand it anymore. Why didn't you tell me? I asked, my voice tight with the frustration that had been building. I deserve the truth. She didn't move, her eyes focused on the counter as if it held more answers than she did. Her silence was its own response, one that spoke louder than any words she could offer. How long has this been going on? I pressed. How long have you been hiding this from me? She flinched at the question, her hands gripping the edge of the sink like it was the only thing holding her together. I could see the guilt in her, but it wasn't enough to take away the anger rising in me. "I didn't mean for this to happen," she said, barely above a whisper. I couldn't hold back anymore. "But it did," I shot back. "It happened. You've been living this lie with me. I don't get it, Sarah. I don't get how you could do this." She didn't answer, just let her breath out in a quiet sigh. I could feel the coldness in the room, the way she was retreating further and further. "I never wanted to hurt you," she murmured, as if that could make it better. But it didn't. The truth was hanging between us, and she wasn't ready to face it. "It doesn't matter what you wanted," I said, my voice rising. "It happened, and you kept it from me. You've been keeping it from me this whole time." She met my eyes then, but only briefly, before looking away again. "I never thought it would go this far," she said softly. I shook my head. "You can't undo it now. You can't just go back and fix this." "I know," she whispered. The finality in her voice hit me harder than I expected. I realized then that we weren't just facing a problem anymore. We were facing the end. "We can't fix this," I said, my voice cracking. "Maybe we never could." She didn't respond. The space between us felt wider than ever. The woman I thought I knew was slipping away, and all I had was the empty silence to fill the void. I turned away from her then, unable to stand the sight of her any longer. I didn't know what I was hoping for. Maybe for her to finally break down, to tell me everything, or maybe for some miracle where the truth would just make sense. But there was no miracle, no sudden revelation. All I had were the fragments of a life I didn't recognize. I walked out of the kitchen and into the living room, trying to escape the suffocating air between us. My hands were shaking, my head spinning with questions I couldn't seem to answer. I had no idea who Sarah was anymore, or what we had become. Behind me, I heard her footsteps. She was coming after me, but I didn't turn around. I couldn't. If I looked at her again, I'd only see the woman I thought I knew, the woman who was gone. "Please," she said, her voice fragile, almost pleading. "Don't leave like this. Let's talk about it." I felt a pang of guilt, but it wasn't enough to stop me. "What is there to talk about, Sarah? Everything we had is gone. You can't just pretend this isn't happening." Her words hung in the air, but I wasn't sure if they were meant for me or for herself. "I don't know how to fix this. I never wanted any of this." I didn't respond. I couldn't. There was nothing she could say that would change what had already been broken. She had made her choice, whether she realized it or not, and it had nothing to do with me. It was a choice she had made in silence, a choice that had left me in the dark. I stood by the window, looking out at the night. The world seemed so quiet, so far away from the chaos inside the house. I wanted to escape, to run, but there was nowhere to go. This was my life now, shattered, irreparably broken. "I can't do this anymore," I said, my voice barely audible. "I can't keep pretending." She didn't answer. She just stood there, her presence in the room like a weight that I couldn't shake. It wasn't anger anymore that I felt. It was something worse. It was the bitter realization that there was nothing left to save. The quiet between us was deafening. I couldn't bring myself to turn around, to face her. I didn't know what I would see in her eyes. Maybe the same guilt that had been there before, or maybe something else. But I couldn't stand it. I couldn't stand her standing there, so close, yet so far. I didn't know how to fix what was broken. I didn't know if it could be fixed. Every word she spoke now felt like an echo, a faint reminder of the woman I had thought I knew. But the truth was clearer now than ever. That woman was gone, and what was left wasn't someone I recognized. "Don't you think this has gone far enough?" I said, turning to face her, my voice sharp. "You've had your chance. You've had all the time in the world to come clean, and now it's too late." Her eyes welled up, but she didn't speak. It felt like she was waiting for me to say something else, something that would make it all better. But I couldn't. There were no words left. No apologies would make it right. No explanations would take away the sting of betrayal. "I don't want this anymore," I said, the words feeling hollow but true. "I don't want this life. I don't want the lies." She looked at me, her face twisted with something I couldn't define. Was it regret? Sorrow? It didn't matter. The damage had been done, and what we had was no longer something I could salvage. "I know I've hurt you," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "But I never wanted to." "But you did," I replied, my throat tight. "And that's the part one can't get past. You chose this. You chose him, and you chose to hide it from me. I can't keep pretending I'm okay with that." Her face crumpled. the weight of the moment crashing down on her. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I never meant to make you feel this way." It wasn't enough. The apology wasn't enough. She was sorry, but that didn't change anything. The trust was gone, shattered into pieces I couldn't put back together. I stepped toward the door, my hand gripping the handle, the cool metal grounding me as I made my decision. "I'm done," I said, the finality of my words hanging in the air. She didn't stop me. She didn't say anything else. I opened the door, stepping out into the night, the weight of it all finally sinking in. The life I thought I had was over, and there was no going back. I didn't know where I was going. I just needed to be away from the house, away from her. The night air was cold against my skin, but it didn't bother me. It was like I was numb, like everything I'd known had been ripped out of me and replaced with an emptiness that wouldn't go away. I kept walking, my footsteps echoing on the pavement, the city lights flickering in the distance. Everything felt distant, out of reach. I didn't care where I was going. I just needed space to breathe, to think, to figure out what came next. In the distance, a few cars passed by, their headlights casting long shadows on the street. I barely noticed them. My mind was elsewhere, circling over the same thoughts that had been haunting me all night. The lies, the betrayal, the image of her with him. The man I didn't even know, the man who had taken everything from me. I stopped walking and leaned against a streetlight, staring out at nothing. My chest felt tight, and for a moment, I thought I might be sick. It was hard to process everything, to understand how everything had unraveled so quickly. One minute, I thought we were fine. The next, I was standing outside, having walked away from the woman I had married. I closed my eyes, trying to push back the pain. I didn't know if I'd ever be able to forgive her, or if I even wanted to. It was one thing to have doubts, to feel something was off, but to know, without a doubt, that she had been hiding something so huge from me, it was too much. I wanted to scream, to do something, but instead, I just stood there, leaning against the cold metal, as if the world had paused, waiting for me to make sense of it all. Eventually, I started walking again, not caring where my feet were taking me. I didn't want to go back to the house, not yet. Not when everything felt like it was falling apart. I thought about calling her, asking her to explain herself one more time, but I didn't. What was there left to say? Everything I needed to know, I already knew. The trust was gone, and once it's gone, it's almost impossible to get back. I walked for what felt like hours, but in reality, it was probably only a few minutes. The city buzzed around me, life moving on as it always did, unaware of the quiet storm I was enduring. I found myself at a small park, the kind that was often overlooked by the people rushing through their busy lives. I sat on one of the benches, my hands still trembling from everything that had happened. The cool air seemed to clear my mind, but not enough. It wasn't enough to stop the aching in my chest, the crushing weight of betrayal. I couldn't stop thinking about Sarah, about the woman who had promised me everything, and yet had kept the biggest secret of all. What did I mean to her? Was I ever truly enough, or was I just another chapter in a story she had already decided to write without me? I wanted to hate her. I wanted to scream at the injustice of it all. But instead, all I felt was a numb emptiness, as if I had already lost everything and there was nothing left to fight for. I reached for my phone, staring at it for a long moment. I could call her. I could ask her why, demand the truth. But what would that change? Would it give me back the trust that was now gone? Would it somehow undo the damage that had already been done? I knew the answer, but part of me still wanted to hear her say something, anything, to give me some closure. But deep down, I knew I wouldn't get that from her. I'd never get the answers I needed. I stood up slowly, my legs feeling heavy. The cold night air didn't seem to matter anymore. I wasn't sure where I was going, or if I even wanted to go anywhere. I just needed to keep moving, keep putting distance between myself and the life I had built with her. I walked back to the house eventually, though I didn't want to. It was like a pull I couldn't escape from. It didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a place full of ghosts, full of memories that had been tainted by the truth. When I stepped inside, the house was eerily quiet. She was gone, or at least, it felt like she was. I didn't look for her. I didn't know what to say, what to feel. The house was just empty, just like everything else. I collapsed onto the couch, my eyes heavy, the weight of everything settling in. There was no going back, no fixing what had been broken. The woman I thought I knew had vanished, and I was left with the shattered pieces of what used to be my life. I didn't know what the future held. Maybe one day, I'd find peace. Maybe I'd be able to forgive. But for now, all I had was the silence. And it was louder than anything I'd ever known.